The train was made from a variety of recycled timber. The chassis were all cut from the frame of a bedside cabinet, whilst the loco's cab and the carriage bodies were made from an old garage door frame. To ensure the widths were identical, the two types of timber were fixed together with double-sided tape before being put through the thicknesser. Once separated, the pieces went back through the thicknesser to achieve their individual thickness. The loco's boiler was cut from a length of salvaged dowel, although the original idea was to use a piece of a broom's handle. The variation in diameter between the two makes very little difference. In order to produce the flat on the dowel, it was screwed to a flat piece of sacrificial MDF. A pencil line was marked on both ends of the dowel in order to try and get the screw holes in line. Using a drill guide, a 5 mm diameter clearance hole was drilled through both ends of the dowel. These holes were then countersunk to ensure the screw heads were below the level of the finished flat. Caution! Ensure the screw heads are below the finished flat size, and that they do not protrude through the underside of the mounting board. Once securely mounted, the dowel was put through the thicknesser to achieve the desired dimension across the flat. To remove the fixing screw holes, both ends of the dowel were cropped on the chop saw. The ends were set aside for later use. Having been marked off and center punched along the side, the chassis were drilled 7 mm diameter for the axle holes. Drilling them all, whilst still on the parent material, made them easier to drill and safer to hold. With the axle holes drilled, 3 for the loco and 2 for each of the carriages, the chassis were cut to length. The chassis for the coal tender and guard's van were both produced in the same manner. The ends of the chassis were marked out, and the coupling pin holes were drilled 6 mm diameter. Then, they were cut out on the bandsaw. Once the ends had been cut out, they were finished on the belt sander. The loco's cab and the bodies of the coaches were all cut to length on the chop saw. The windows, 1 in the loco's cab and 2 in each of the coaches, were drilled with a Forstner bit, 15 mm diameter. One of the ends, cut from the dowel, was used to set a guide rail to ensure the holes for the funnel and the steam dome would be on the center line. The positions for the funnel and the steam dome were marked out along the length of the boiler. At each point, a small flat was created to prevent the drill from slipping off what would otherwise be a curved surface. Once each flat was created, the positions of the holes had to be remarked. The holes for the funnel and steam dome were drilled 8 mm and 6 mm respectively. The boiler was treated with a coat of dark polish, which also stained the wood and provided a contrast with the color of the chassis. One end of the boiler had to be marked out and drilled 6 mm diameter to accept the button which formed the smoke box door. This should have been done prior to applying the polish. The button, which forms the steam box door, was turned on the lathe, off camera. The loco's chassis was sanded to remove all the markings. Then the loco's cab was glued in place. The weight was used until the glue became tacky and the two pieces less likely to move. At that point, a clamp was applied for the 4 hours recommended. The funnel and the steam dome are pieces of dowel. The black stain came from a Sharpie pen. The loco's chassis and cab were treated with mineral oil and rested on two 3mm dowels to dry. An untreated streak was left along the middle of the chassis to assist gluing the boiler in place. The boiler door was also treated, and the original dowel offcut was used as a drying stand. The boiler was glued in place, with elastic bands being used as clamps. The wheels were cut with a hole saw. The pilot bit, being 6mm diameter, was the correct size to suit the dowel rod used for the axles. By cutting most of the way through the material, then turning it over to finish from the opposite side, makes it easier to remove the wheel blank from the cutter. The wheels were mounted in pairs, on a mandrel which was a 6mm diameter bolt. The periphery was sanded, and the outer edges slightly rounded over. The wheels were then reversed on the mandrel, the periphery finished, and the other two edges rounded over. The wheels were also treated with mineral oil. The axles were cut from 6mm diameter dowel. The wheels were glued to the axles and fitted in place. The coupling pin was also added. Assembling the carriages was very straightforward. First, the bodies were glued to the chassis. Then, the coupling pins were glued in place. After which, the roof was glued on. For reference, a length of wood of the correct width and thickness was used for the roofs. A 3mm rad was cut on what would be the top edges. The length of the rad would allow for both of the roofs to be cut to their finished length on the chop saw. Unfortunately, that piece of film went missing. The carriages were treated with mineral oil before the wheels were fitted. Making the coal tender required 2 pre-cut side pieces being glued to the chassis. The front and back pieces were cut to suit. The piece at the front was a little loose, hence the clamp holding it in position whilst both pieces are glued in. The guard's van was like the carriage bodies, but instead of windows, it had 2 drilled holes, one for the chimney, and one for the rear red light. Both of these items were cut from 6 mm dowel and colored with a Sharpie pen. The wheels and the coupling pins were added to finish both wagons. Using the drawing as a template, the couplings were first drilled 8 mm diameter at both ends. The profiles were cut out on the bandsaw and finished on the belt sander. With the templates removed, the harsh edges were all softened with a needle file, and the couplings were treated with mineral oil. If you are interested in seeing more videos on how to make wooden toys, please like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.